What do these images have in common? Right, buildings and landmarks are illuminated on them in colour, in orange or purple. But do you also know what that means? Why do these buildings light up?
33 vrouwen in Nederland.
76 mujeres en España.
128 women in the UK
142 femmes en France.
210 Frauen in Deutschland
were killed by their partner, ex-partner or family member in 2015 alone. Femicides, murders of women based on their gender, misogyny as a motive. You have to ask yourself why men think they can exercise so much control over women and not their boss, friend, colleague or neighbour. And at the same time the thought comes to mind, how frighteningly normal it seems. Zonta says no to all violence against women and girls. With Orange Your City in District 29, Zonta draws attention to this violence and at the same time makes a statement against forced prostitution.
Matrimonios infantiles.
Gewalt im sozialen Nahraum.
Aanranding.
Mutilation génitale féminine.
Violencia sexual.
Gewalt unter Partnern.
Contre toutes les formes de violence à l'égard des femmes et des filles.
We live in a structurally misogynistic society. Sounds tough, doesn't it? But let's look at a few facts. Men list all violent statistics as both perpetrators and victims, all but one, that of partnership violence. According to these statistics, every third day a woman in Germany is killed by her partner or ex-partner or dies as a result of violent injuries. Worldwide, 137 women are killed every day by their partner, ex-partner or family member.
Vriendinnen.
Hijas.
Épouse.
Großmütter.
Sisters.
Partners.
Ex-socios.
Mère.
But it stands to reason that the number of unreported femicides is significantly higher, because there is no official body which analyses femicides as such. The targeted violence against women based on their gender. If this were the case, the data would become clearer, motives clearer, and structures more visible. Yes, maybe there would even be more preventive measures to counteract violence at an early stage, but unfortunately we are not there yet, not for a long time. If you consider,
Seit wann Frauen in Deutschland ohne Erlaubnis ihres Ehemannes entscheiden dürfen, arbeiten zu gehen?
Sinds wanneer is verkrachting binnen het huwelijk verboden in Nederland?
Y desde cuando la violencia contra las mujeres se califica de grave en España,
then it should come as no surprise to hear that the judiciary is usually the last resort that really makes a difference. One ray of hope is a law that was passed in France in 2020 to better protect victims of domestic violence. It stipulates that the joint apartment can be assigned to the endangered partner alone by means of a court order. That affected women are equipped with special mobile phones that cause a police operation within 3 minutes when the head is pressed, and that partners who are willing to be violent and who are known to the police have electronic shackles get applied. During the lockdown of 16/3, 45,000 help calls made in France by May the 16th, 2020. In the same period last year, there were only 3,919. The law seems to be bearing fruit. After all, 44 fewer women were victims of homicide by their partner or ex-partner in 2020 than in the previous year. But of the 102 women killed, every fifth victim has filed a complaint against their perpetrator of sexual, psychological or physical violence before the killing. But could these women have been saved at all? Yes. According to criminologist Jane Monckton-Smith, who is convinced that femicides are not spontaneous outbursts of emotions but planned actions. Plans that can last from a few hours to several months. Planned actions that follow a pattern that can be broken. Jane Monckton-Smith has developed an 8-step model for risk partnerships for this purpose. A model that should help to recognise the social framework conditions that favour femicides. A pattern that should help to recognise structures at an early stage in order to be able to act as quickly as possible. The following stages are warning messages, the 8 levels of a risky relationship by Jane Monckton-Smith. First stage, the pre-history. In most cases, the perpetrator has a history of control, domestic violence or stalking. Reports from previous partnerships of jealousy, control or possessive behaviour are predictions of the potential for coercive control in the future. Second stage, previous relationship. The potential perpetrator seeks familiarity and commitment in a relationship at an early stage. The regular development of a romantic relationship is accelerated. The couple is together all the time. It gets very serious very quickly. Other social contacts, such as friends or family, are neglected. Third stage, control. Once a relationship is established with someone who is possessive and controlling, it is very likely that the relationship will be dominated by obsessional control. Some perpetrators use violence, others do not. This perpetrator behaviour aims to keep the victim trapped in the relationship, creating obstacles that make it difficult to break out of the relationship. Fourth stage, murder trigger. In this phase, the risk for the affected woman increases. A trigger that calls into question the status of the perpetrator or challenges his control can become a great risk for those affected. The most important international trigger is a separation or an impending separation. Perpetrators find them less heartbreaking than they are outrageous and unacceptable. Other triggers can be pregnancy, financial distress, illness, or a life change, such as a layoff. Fifth stage, escalation. During this phase, some perpetrators try to regain their diminishing control. Control patterns can be increased or violence is used. They beg and cry or threaten murder or suicide. Some perpetrators switch back and forth between the various tactics. Threats should be taken very seriously at this stage. Sixth stage, change of heart. This stage can be very difficult to spot for professionals, but victims may notice small changes. It is possible that the perpetrator calms down. It is also possible that the threat is increased or the anger of the perpetrator grows. At this stage, the perpetrator decides how he will resolve the situation. Either he finds a new victim and the whole cycle starts all over again, or the victim withdraws and the relationship has reached level 3 again until the next trigger. It is also in this phase that the perpetrators decide to break the relationship with a murderer. Seventh stage, murder planning. This phase presents a particular challenge for the crime of passion narrative, a myth since in most cases there are indications of planning. From an internet search for methods of killing to buying a weapon, this planning can be varied. In the planning phase, the perpetrator decides how the murder should happen. This can take different lengths of time for different perpetrators, but usually there is a planning phase of over a month between the trigger and the murder. Eighth stage, murder. This stage can again be very diverse. Perpetrators stage their murder as a suicide or accident. Other perpetrators confess their murder immediately after the crime, and still others commit extended suicide. Some perpetrators practice victim blaming, try to portray themselves as victims, and claim to have acted in self-defense. For Christina Clem, it is important to emphasise, not all femicides occur exclusively in the social environment. There are also killings of women in certain discriminated groups, such as sex workers, trans women, women with disabilities, or racist femicides. At the same time, of course, that doesn't mean that every killing of a woman is a femicide. The point is that the killings happen because of the gender ratio. Killings, for example, in the case of a deliberate traffic offence, are not included. In 2012 alone, 43,600 women and young girls worldwide were killed by a partner, ex-boyfriend, or family member. A third of all women also state that they have suffered some form of violence, whether physical or sexual, at least once in their life, but only 11% of the victims file a complaint. Why is that? This could be due, among other things, to the public perception of violent crimes against women, because these are still very much privatised. If you think of the various headlines that mean the killing of a woman by a man.
Drama de celos.
Seksaanval.
Meurtre passionné.
Beziehungstat.
Matanza de honor.
Familiedrama.
Tragédie familiale.
Ehedrama.
Sex offender. These terms create the impression that the acts are extraordinary strokes of fate, tragic, shocking, individual cases, without any rational explanation. Yes, there are, because contrary to what is suggested, namely that personal relationship conflicts are the cause of a homicide by a jealous, individual perpetrator, it is rather a structural problem. Because when a woman is murdered, it is by no means an isolated incident. When we talk about femicides, a pattern emerges clearly. A man's claim or perception to have a woman at his disposal. It's not about jealousy or relationship problems. It's about ownership and dominance. The perpetrators don't want women to make independent decisions. they want control. Patriarchal structures continually justify claims to ownership of a woman, and while the media, especially pop culture, deals with the perpetrators, his psyche, his past, and his version of history, one aspect is massively disadvantaged: the women themselves affected, victims and survivors of domestic violence, stalking and attempted killings. The public is quick to judge.
¿Ella lo provocó?
Wat ging er mis in de relatie?
Pourquoi n'est-elle pas partie?
Aside from the fact that these comments are a terrible kind of victim blaming, that is, the victim is blamed for the crime, it is interesting to see how clear the case seems to be for the public. But the spiral of control and potential violence, possibly economic dependency, threats of violence against children, family members or pets, none of this is seen by the public. The truth is that it can be very dangerous for the woman to leave the perpetrator. Shouldn't one rather ask why the perpetrator didn't stop? How could the perpetrator take the right to control, terrorise and use violence against the woman? What many forget is that the offers of help for women affected leave a lot to be desired, to say the least. For example, fleeing a violent partnership is not enough. Those affected need a new apartment, work, possibly school offers for children. There is simply no support system that can give women a strong sense of protection, and that has to change. But what can and should change beforehand is the public's perception.
Die gesellschaftliche Stellung der Frau.
Reconocimiento de la existencia de discriminación estructural contra la mujer.
La reconnaissance de la misogynie comme motif de meurtre.
In the 16 member states of the EU, 854 women were killed because of their gender in 2017.
Die meisten davon in Finnland, Nordirland und Rumänien.
En todo el mundo, 137 mujeres y niñas son asesinadas todos los días por motivos misóginos.
En 2019, 147 femmes ont été tuées par leur partenaire ou ex-conjoint en France.
In Nederland sterft elke 10 dagen een vrouw als gevolg van huiselijk geweld. 76% van de vermoorde vrouwen in 2018 werd vermoord door hun partner of ex-partner.
In the UK, femicides are done 2 times a week. The numbers are terrifying, but what we need to understand is that these are not just numbers. There is a story behind every number. Behind every number, there is a woman. But as shocking as the situation is for women, however paralysed it may leave us behind, we are not helpless. Spain is seen as a pioneer in the fight against gender-based violence. How did it come about? Through the strength, effort and assertiveness of numerous women who took to the streets to raise awareness of femicides and put pressure on the government. On December 28, 2004, the
Ley Orgánica 2004 de Violencia de Género
was passed, the first law in the EU against domestic violence. In 2008, there were 76 femicides in Spain, and in 2018, the number fell to 48 kills. Still 48 too much, no question about it. But it turns out that measures such as electronic shackles for those at risk, as well as a helpline for women at risk, are having an effect. In France, feminists also fought vigorously for tough measures against violence in the social environment after a 16% increase in femicides within a year. On September 25, 2020, the Domestic Violence Act came into force.
Décret numéro 2020-1161 du 23 septembre 2020 relatif à la mise en œuvre d'un dispositif électronique mobile anti-rapprochement.
Also provides that partners who are known to be violent are given electronic shackles to keep them at a distance from the women at risk. Theresa May introduced a draft law against domestic violence to Parliament in July 2019. The law is known as the Domestic Abuse Act, which aims to help combat domestic violence in the UK. These are good developments that show us that it pays to take to the streets, to draw attention, to be loud. The so-called Istanbul Convention applies to Europe, a Council of Europe Convention on combating and preventing gender-based violence in the form of an international treaty. So-called stalking was finally made a criminal offence, but actually protective measures, such as the creation of urgently needed places in women's shelters, measures that are more expensive, have only been partially implemented so far. Another sad development is that on March 19, 2021, Turkey was the only country to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, a major setback for women in Turkey. Poland also announced its withdrawal from the contract, but this has not yet happened. It is important that women do not allow themselves to be beaten by these decisions. The cases in Spain and France have shown that women raise their voices to be effective. We are not helpless victims, apathetic or disturbed. We can make a difference. Every attempt counts. Orange your city in District 29 as a signal that we all recognise and condemn the violence against girls and women. We want to break open structures together, turn ideas into action, and strengthen and encourage affected girls and women. Because women's rights are human rights. Enlighten, encourage, and, above all, fight with every lighted building, every orange scarf or umbrella, every event on November the 25th. Orange your city in District 29, against violence against women and girls.